So it is with great pleasure that I get to introduce Laurie Jerue, who some of you recognize from last year's event, and you may know her without realizing it, that Laurie is the founder and the co-moderator of an online support group called Illinois Parents of Adults with Developmental Disabilities Unite, otherwise lovingly known as iPad Unite. It was started in 2006 by Laurie and Ellen Garber-Bronfield. The group is comprised of over 1,500 self-advocates, parents, adult siblings, and others who care and advocate around the issues facing adults with disabilities after they leave special education services. And to be clear, if you haven't checked her bio already, Laurie is a serial support group leader. So this online, all Illinois, throughout the whole state support group is the perfect venue for Laurie to share her expertise, her resources, her heartfelt realities of what she's come across and ideas for how to make things happen, as well as what we really face from her own perspectives. Laurie has also previously worked on 181 Special Education Parent Network, the Autism Community Connection, and Naperville Works, which was a 2-year employment initiative using social capital of parents and local transition programs, which resulted in the creation of over 40 sustainable, part-time, paid positions filled by local transition age students. And I love this line, in her spare time. In her spare time, which as if you have any, Laurie. In your spare time, I do know that Laurie is very creative. Gardening and the arts are some of those few things. I know it's not on the sheet, but I think if she really did have true spare time, she would spend more time on those kinds of things. But clearly her passion is her daughter and the rights of people with disabilities as they age out of the school system. So she does also enjoy coordinating a 3-part speaker series in Naperville, which brings together families and professionals to learn about best practices and trends in housing, jobs, and life skills training. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Laurie Jerue.
So this picture up here is a picture of my daughter Sarah and I. Sarah's 27 years old. She has a smile and a laugh that can light up a room. She also is a first-class screamer. She's pretty nonverbal. She was one who seemed to be developing very precociously till about the age of 2.5, when she contracted the measles repeatedly after her MMR vaccines, and then she just withdrew, lost all of her language, and started screaming instead. So we've walked the autism world journey since before there was the internet, which is really, kind of amazing. Used to go look up books in the library. What is this stuff? It's not in Dr. Spock's book of baby care, Anyway, what I wanted to talk to you all about today, and I'm humbled to follow Ed's introduction of what's available in the system. What I wanted to talk to you all about was that about a year and a half ago, in March of 2014, Sarah was one of the fortunate people that got one of those letters in the mailbox, and it invited her to apply for SILA or home-based services. And since that time, I really feel like we learned an awful lot as a family. We did things the hard way because we didn't think about a lot of this stuff before the letter arrived in the mailbox. And you see people that get that letter and they're like, woohoo, we got this letter, and it's so awesome. And then, as Ed says, if you haven't prepared or thought or talked about a lot of this stuff, then you start looking around, and what most of us do is we start thinking, well, what's available? Surely out there's the perfect group home that, little Sarah or Johnny will want to live in, and it's going to be close to our house, and it's going to be wonderful. And then you quickly realize that you don't even know if your child is ready to move out of your family home. You don't know how far away they want to live or who they want to live with. And the ISC agencies will contact you to develop and get approved a place that my son or daughter can go live. It's like you're leaving money on the table. At least that's the way my husband felt about it. He's like, every week we don't do something, we're leaving money on the table. And, and it's like, you're like, well, yeah, she's been approved for these services, and we're like going under from the stress and strain and physicality of caring for our beautiful daughter, whom we love, more than anything. But it's so smart. And I beg all of you to please start, if you haven't had these conversations with your families, start having them now. Because you're going to be surprised, like as I was. My husband and I, one of the number one thing on here, who should be involved in the decision-making process, and are your visions for the future in sync? Well, I assumed it's me and my husband, and we have a son who's 2 years younger than Sarah. He was in college, and I thought, well, he's probably not going to be too involved, but, we'll ask him. And so they both wanted to be involved, which I initially thought was great, until they had a different vision than mine. And I was like, oh, crap. Wait a minute. I don't think I want to know your visions, But it's but it's a serious thing when, like, my husband was saying, well, I don't think she's very tied to Naperville, and she could move anywhere. And I'm like, no, you've been at work all these years. We've been developing and crafting very carefully this meaningful day that she has, which involves volunteering as some of you in this room know, volunteering at our Naperville police station in the records division, and she's done that for 7 years now. And Jim just thought, my husband was like, well, just find her another job at another police station. And I'm like, you don't understand. You don't understand how long it took me to find that thing. So it's important, because I just thought, kind of like Sarah does, I think, whatever she's thinking in her brain, she thinks everybody else is thinking around her. And I was like, my husband and I were not on the same page at all. So you also want to talk to your son or daughter, or communicate with them in whatever form that takes. In our case, we say we put on a detective hat and just watch her behavior. We watch her in certain situations, and we try to assess what she likes and what she doesn't like based on her behaviors, more so than her. We can't just ask her a question like, oh, where would you like to live? Or, what kind of people do you like to be around? So we put on our detective hat and we watch her nonverbal communication, and then we make note of that. But again, this is things that for many of you, you could have conversations with your sons or daughters. You could do the detective hat technique, or maybe you have others in your circle of, family and friends and teachers and therapists who could help you, along with your son or daughter, ascertain what kinds of things are really they going to need, and who would they prefer to be around. Number 3 was a big one for us, because we realized we had never ever prepared our daughter for the idea of moving out of her home. She's Ellen, I don't know, Ellen McManus might have to help me too. Sarah's very tied to her home, and she's very tied to routines, and very tied to the known. Anything new, anything unknown, like when I was driving here today, I made a couple of wrong turns. Thank you, whoever helped me find my way here. But I made a few wrong turns, and if I did that with Sarah, or if we were driving and there was a construction on the road and there was a detour, she would freak out. She's in the back. She would just start screaming and flailing, and no, because she has that innate sense of direction, and she's like, no, we're supposed to be going straight here, Mom. We're not supposed to be turning right. Instead of being able to communicate that or understand the idea of a detour, she would just scream for 45 minutes. And then she would have a horrible day that day, and she would go home and probably not sleep that night because she would be so upset over that detour. So for us, this was a pretty easy one to answer, because we were like, no, she does not want to move out of our home and try to learn to accept and trust potential new staff, strangers coming, at her to help her with personal care, all of the things that Ed mentioned with his daughter. We have too with Sarah. She has a lot of very intimate personal care needs that someone needs to help her with. So we decided that moving her out of our family home, at least for now, was not going to work. So, I'm not going to go through every single one of these, but I think you're getting the idea, right? That you want to go through and at least think about these and start to just write down some of the things that are what I started referring to as non-negotiables in terms of planning. And so when you get that letter, if you've done some of this discussion before, you can approach the ISC, your ISA, Independent Service and Support Advocate. You can approach them, you and your son or daughter, with a lot more knowledge about what you need. So you're never going to ask that question, well, what's available? Okay, because, well, you might want to ask what's available, but all the things that Ed was talking about, how there's, not this and there's not that, and it's not, not going to be what you want. So think about what you do want and be prepared with a list of these are the things that my son or daughter needs. And this is what he or she is looking for. So that then you're coming at it not from a position of, what's available, what little crumbs can you give us? It's going to be, here's a documentation of what my son or daughter needs. And when we were preparing Sarah's transition service plan, and somebody here I think you had brought up the documentation, do you have to go out and get a psychiatrist? We actually went back and got some school records. We got some school records, old IEP records, that documented her behaviors and how they would spike up whenever, and her anxiety would spike up whenever there were substitutes, whenever there was a change in schedules, a change in school, all of those kinds of things that are documented. And we put them together, we cut and pasted and put them together and created kind of a chronology of her history in terms of, they refer to it, this is not, I don't know what Ellen would tell me to say here, but the state refers to it as maladaptive behaviors. So, we had a chronology that we could share with the state and say, look, we also had a chronology for her day, the way she spent her days, and how, having this state community routine with one-on-one support really helped her manage the rest of her week, so that if she had 2 days in the community with one-on-one support where she was going to the police station, then taking a break and going for a sensory car ride, because that's one of her sensory things that really calms her down. And then, she was going to go run errands, and then she was going to go to the health club and swim, which is another sensory activity. We laid out in this chronologic format how well that worked for her. And then we also had, because she had gotten home-based services prior to the Legis letter, we had also tried a typical day program, adult day program, for 2 years. And the way that looked for Sarah is she was essentially in a room, literally in a warehouse, because that's where a lot of them are. So picture, really high ceilings, like a warehouse, with like the fan spinning around, that make noises like this thing squeaks, squeaking. No windows, cement floors. Sound would just, there's 40 other people in her day program, which was one of the smaller ones in our area. Many of the ones I toured had up to 100 people, staffed at 8 to 1, 15 to 1, and loud, just loud. And Sarah's coping mechanism with that, she wouldn't participate. Her coping mechanism was perimeter walking around the floor of the warehouse, screaming and stimming, doing all this stimming, like sometimes hitting herself in the head. And we had that documented. The provider had that documented. In fact, the provider created a new kind of day program, which is another long story, which is much smaller and has carpeting. Has carpeting on the floor and regular ceilings that is designed for people, clients who have autism that don't do well in the larger settings. But at any rate, we came in with all of this documentation, and the happy news is we got the letter in March of 2014. You guys would not have to take this long because you're going to be so much better educated than I was. I had to kind of figure all this stuff out for myself. So it took us until July of 2015 to officially open Sarah's one-person SILA in her home, in her family home. So she lives in the home she's lived in for the last 20 years, which is our family home in Naperville. She has supports that come, direct support people who come in, and she gets 24-hour care in our home. During the week, Monday through Fridays, my husband and I move out of the home, which we were very fortunate in many ways to be able to do, and not everybody has the circumstance, I realize, but our son, our only other child, had graduated from college. We had no car payments, no college payments. Our mortgage payment was pretty much zeroed out because we'd lived in the house for so long. So we were able, my husband works in the city of Chicago in the Loop, and we were able to go rent a small condominium in the Loop so he could walk to work, and we can both sleep during the week. And then we come home on the weekends and reunite with our daughter and take care of her. It's like a family visit, except in the reverse. The family leaves the SILA, and then the family returns to the SILA on the weekends. And the state, at first they were kind of like, whoa, what is this idea? But to their credit, they worked with us. And I don't have any, somebody said to me the other day, well, but you must have had a lot of legislative pull. And I got to tell you, we had no legislative pull. We had no pull. Never contacted a legislator. We worked with our ISC. I did have a really good relationship with a provider who we had known. Sarah had gotten respite services from this provider when she was little. And then we were doing the day program with them. But they were all willing to take a chance on it because no one could imagine what the alternative would be, I think. So sometimes people advise me not to say this, but I'm going to just say it so that you guys have a sense of what is possible. Sarah was awarded a $150,000 a year award for a one-person SILA. So I think what Ed was saying earlier about, the state, for people who have, now my daughter has a lot of behaviors, a lot of challenges. She's not a 70 IQ. Well, I think she's really very smart. I do think she's really very, very smart, but she can't communicate that. So so what Ed was saying before about the state, especially in these days of legis, wanting to try to work with families to keep people out of state institutions, the 150 is a lot cheaper than, I don't know, Sarah would have been above the average, I'm quite sure. So if the average is 250 in a state-run institution, you know, she probably would have been at 275 or 3. She wouldn't have been at the average or below. So it's a lot cheaper for the state to do it this way. And it's something that we hope, because we wrote it as a transitional plan, we hope that she will one day soon, maybe in the next year or two, be able to find a roommate or two. You know, we don't want her to live by herself for the rest of her life. And that's what we're working on. That's what the ongoing transition plan addresses, is those roommate skills, which sadly, you know, when you're in school, the teachers always say, life skills, and you're like, the parents are like, yeah, life skills, you know, life skills. We want to work on reading, you know, or math. And it's like, no, trust me, work on the life skills. Work on the life skills. Yeah, really. So, really, really, really work on the life skills. So that's what we're doing right now. I also had a page that I think they put in your packets that Ed already touched on, the ICAP summary. Ed was the one who said to me when we were first going through this process, and I was saying, oh, we're writing up this beautiful transition service plan. It's so beautiful, and it so captures what Sarah needs. And he goes, that's not going to matter. What's going to matter is the ICAP score. And I didn't even know she had an ICAP score, because I was sure I had never completed one. But if your son or daughter is already getting home-based services, how many in the room already have home-based support waiver services? Each of your sons and daughters already has an ICAP score. Now, how many of you know what your son or daughter's ICAP score is? Oh, sure, Matt Copel, of course, raises his hand. Yeah, Matt, yeah. Matt is one of my neighbors from Naperville here. So here's the thing. Ed is, as usually happens, is very right. Sarah had an ICAP score that had been developed. I think the rules, you'd have to go to the website and really look at it, but the rules say that it needs to be completed. There's questions. It's a questionnaire. It's an assessment tool. So there's questions, and it says that the questions need to be answered by someone who has been around your son or daughter for at least 3 months. Ed, do you know? 3 months. So what happens is your home-based facilitator, you know, from the agency that provides you facilitation services, that really nice person that comes to your house every other month and sits at your kitchen table and says, so how are things going? You know, we all know that person. They're very nice. They're filling out the ICAP score while they're sitting at your kitchen table. They're filling out ICAP questions. So they're asking you, so how's Johnny been doing? And you say, oh, because we want to put the positive spin on it, right? We're like, oh, he's doing really great. And they're like, oh, okay, really great. Okay, ICAP score, really great. So the good news is you can find out what your ICAP score is, or your son or daughter's, by looking at their last independent or individual service plan, their ISP that everyone gets written once a year, that has a couple of goals on it that you guys are supposed to be tracking. I know I did it for a few years. I never knew Sarah had an ICAP score, because I would get the form and think, oh, you know, okay, I know what this is, and I'd like toss it in the file and not look at it. But she had an ICAP score, and her ICAP score was like 70, 65, 70. And when I asked the agency about it, they said, well, we do, you know, this is how we do it. We do it when they come to the visits. And I said, well, no one ever told me I was doing an assessment that mattered, that mattered for anything. And they said, yeah, well, you're supposed to answer them, the questions, as if no one is at home in the house with your son or daughter. No one. No one. No one. That's the definition of independent, right? So if you or I are independent, that means we can do it when no one's around.
And having their worst day, right? If I remember.
Yeah, right. And right. You're having a bad day.
Their worst day.
You're having a bad day. Do you know how to, cook yourself a meal? Do you know how to call 911? Do you know how to, my favorite question I think of all on the actual instrument is, can you climb a 6-foot ladder unassisted? Now I know my service facilitator never asked me that question, because that I think would have I would have gone, huh? Why are you asking me that question?
Laurie, this has been awesome. Do we have time for like one quick question for
Yeah,
her
go
before we
ahead.
bring up some more parents? You guys are going to have to duke it out. And since she's closer.
What is the range of ICAP scores? What is considered low, high, middle?
It goes, I believe, from 0 to 100. 0 to 100. So anyway, when I did redo it with knowing that I was answering if Sarah was alone in the house, it went down to an 18. She would have never been approved for one-person SILA with an ICAP, of 60 or above. I didn't lie, you just have to be very honest.
So I'm just wondering about the house that you have. So does the state pay for
No,
taxes?
no. We separated the housing, the brick and mortar, we separated the brick and mortar from the services. So typically the state backs out your son or daughter's SSI and has some other, Ed would know this better than me or some of the other speakers. There are certain things that they load in there or unload from the award that covers rent, maintenance, taxes, insurance, upkeep of the home. My husband and I do that. We remained her rep payees, so we still live in the home part-time. So we still maintain the home. And then the SILA only pays for her services.
I think we are going to bring up our next speaker.
All right.
Thank you very much.